Hello my quilting friends! Leah Day here with a new video for the Machine Quilting Block Party. Today we're learning how to quilt our glitter star block, and just in case you're looking for the quilt pattern, you can find it right here at leahday.com. So quilting this glitter star is going to be really fun. We're going to use a combination of zippling, straight lines, and fuse fire. So let's jump on our machine and learn how to get started with free motion quilting this block. So I'm getting started right in the center of this quilt block, and I'm going to stitch the design called zippling. And this is just a zigzaggy design. Make nice straight lines and sharp angles, and it forms kind of a zigzag pattern. Now, this design is very similar to sharp stippling and stippling, those two designs, because we're not going to cross our lines of quilting. I'm going to try and stitch this and work it more or less into a row as I quilt within this square, and not stitch myself into a corner where I'd have to cross my lines of quilting. You can see I'm being really careful to just work kind of straight up into this corner, and now I'm going to start working my way back. Watch out for those corners. There is a lot of seam allowance in this particular block. Now I know I'm quilting this on a smaller scale than what I drew in the pattern. This is just another one of those situations where I just really wanted it to be a little denser, have a little bit more texture right in the center of the block. It's not going to make it dense, it's not going to make it too stiff, but it is going to make it look interesting, and that was my goal. So I really like it. We can kind of play with scale, sometimes bringing the lines a little closer together, and that definitely adds more interest and beauty to the block. So you can see I worked basically a row straight down and interlocked it with that first set of stippling, and now I'm working my way back up. And I have to watch out for any time that I can't see what I'm doing. That can be a little tricky, so I'm being careful. Sometimes I kind of bend my neck down a little bit if the machine's getting in my way or my foot's getting in my way, and that can be helpful. It also helps just rotate the block around. That way you can see what you're doing and make that rest of that movement really fast and easy. So I've kind of matched up against this line, and I'm going to go on ahead and stitch this in the ditch. I want to show you that you can stitch in the ditch in free motion, but it can be a little tricky. Notice how much I have slowed down. I'm going very slow and very steady, and especially as I near that point, I'm going to go really slow. I'm going to get in there, rotate, and get back out again. I am not going to hang around in that area where I know it's going to potentially hang up my foot, potentially be a problem. Now, another tip for stitching in the ditch and keeping your line nice and straight is to keep kind of an eye on your hand. You've got a straight line here on your index finger. Keep that parallel with your foot, and that can help you stay nice and straight. And as we run back around and meet up with where we started that ditching right here, then I'm going to break thread. Because now I'm going to do a lot of straight line quilting, and I'm going to switch to my walking foot, because the simple fact of the matter is, while I was able to do this okay, it certainly wasn't as easy as it could be or as fast. And I know that by switching to walking foot, I can quilt all of these straight lines, I can quilt in the ditch, I can quilt these outer lines, I can knock out all of that without having to focus quite so hard on the block. So I'm going to switch out my feet, and I'll meet you back here when we're ready to move on to the next area. So I've switched to my walking foot, and I made sure to move my Supreme slider off my feed dogs, and that's just to make sure it doesn't get damaged by the pressure that the slider puts on my quilt. And now I'm just stitching right on those lines. And these lines are about 1/4 inch or so apart. If you want to, you can mark less of them and stitch less of them if you want this area to be a little bit more open and less dense. It's totally up to you. I like the look of closer together lines. I think it's going to really stand out pretty on the quilt. I think it's going to make it look really nice. But this is one of those things. It's a design choice, and you can change it if you don't like it. I'm going to buzz around here. I want you to see just how quick and easy this is. You know, when I do this in free motion, when we were stitching in the ditch in free motion around the zippling, I had to focus on that a lot harder and stitch a lot slower. simply because I was trying to maintain that nice straight line and also stay right in the ditch. When I'm quilting on these marked lines, I can go a lot faster, and it's a lot easier to keep those lines straight because I'm working with the walking foot. Now you have a choice here. This is another design choice. You can break thread for each of these sets of squares, or you can kind of chain them together. I think I'm going to chain them together just simply to reduce the number of thread breaks I'm dealing with here. And what I mean by chain them together is just stitch a little line that connects those squares together, and that little line has now gotten me up to this next set of squares, and I can start stitching these. So by chaining them together like that, I'm avoiding a thread break, fewer threads to tie off and bury within my quilt. It's a little faster. You can see I didn't have to stop quilting and move the block and do all that other stuff. It just kept the flow going, and I really like that. I look for ways that I can connect things together and keep flowing and quilting rather than having to stop. It's something that I learned whenever I was a seamstress, that anytime that I had to stand up and move around, like let's say to get up to press something, or even sometimes to switch from my serger to my sewing machine, I noticed that every time I had to do that, it wasted time and it was a potential distraction. And so it's something that has stuck with me even after all of these years, that whenever I'm looking at a quilt block and I'm wanting to knock it out quick, I'm always looking for ways of reducing kind of those transitions. Reducing the number of times I have to break thread, reducing the number of times I have to move the block around or change feet, all of that kind of good stuff. So from here, I'm just going to continue chaining these squares together. I'm going to do a little stitching here to get up to the next one, just exactly the same way I did before. And I'm going to connect all of these together and knock them all out. And then I'll meet you back here. We're going to stitch in the ditch, and then we're also going to stitch around this outer square as well. So I've stitched all of these lines, and now I am stitching in the ditch. And I just want to show you the difference stitching in the ditch in free motion to stitching in the ditch with your walking foot. And you can see this is much, much easier. For one thing, this is an open toe walking foot, meaning I can see the needle, I can see exactly where I'm going, and the machine is feeding the fabric forward nice and evenly. And I have a very narrow stitch length. My stitch length is 1.4 millimeters, and so it's producing nice, small, tiny stitches. If I accidentally hop out of the ditch, I could easily correct it. So something I decided to do, if you notice, I did that little escape move. Let's see here. I can show it to you here, where I chained these lines together by stitching across the corners. Well, I decided that I really wanted that to look consistent in each of the corners. And so right there, I'm going to pivot, I'm going to turn around, I'm going to stitch into that first square right there. Now I'm going to turn the whole thing back around again and stitch back out. This is, again, one of those little things that's like a little detail, little design choice. It's a way of making the whole center area look symmetrical, making it look like that little escape that I did the first time was intentional, and that's the way it was supposed to look. And I think actually it looks even better now that I made that choice. And this is one of those things that I really want you to start looking at in your quilts. Pay attention and start asking yourself what you want to see and how you want to make things work. If you make a decision like this to make something a little faster and a little easier for yourself, sometimes you might look at it and it might bug you later going, oh, well, that doesn't, I didn't have that same element in all of the other corners. Well, guess what? All you have to do is a little bit of rotation, a little bit of extra stitching, and you can make it look consistent with everything else. So I'm going to stitch right back in, and now I'm going to break my thread. I'm just pulling my foot over, and then I'm going to hit my thread cutter. And then now we're going to go on ahead and start right here and stitch in the ditch and knock out these lines in this outer square. So I'm going to drop my needle down and bring up my bobbin thread. I always do that to start every single line of quilting, just so that way the threads don't make a mess, that bobbin thread doesn't make a mess on the back of the block. Okay, now we're going to get started. Ooh, yep, that's an area of dense, intense seam allowance, so watch out for that. You can hear my needle kind of complaining a little bit as it went in there. but it did work through it. So watch out for that. Now we have these straight lines marked between our triangles. So I'm just carefully stitching right on the line. And then as I get close to the triangle, it's like I'm moving from a marked line to a ditch. So you might want to just get a good grip on the block and maintain your focus and concentration as you stitch this. It is easy because, of course, you've got the lines right there in front of you, but it might feel a little different to do the ditching than it does to stitch on the straight lines. For one thing, there's a lot less seam allowance when you're stitching just the marked line, because it's the difference between stitching basically one layer of fabric here and multiple layers of fabric over that flying geese unit. So keep that in mind and work slowly and carefully throughout the block. We do have a design that's going to go into this space that's zippling, but I'll switch back to free motion quilting when I stitch that design. So I'm going to knock out all of my straight lines, all of my walking foot work first. So now I am working my way back to that starting point, and now I'm right here in the perimeter in that ditch, so I'm going to go on ahead and stitch in the ditch around that block between the center block and the border. I figure I'm already right here, I've already got the right color of thread going and my walking foot, why not go on ahead and knock that ditching out. And I've also got this triangle here that I want to stitch some straight line quilting. So I think I'm going to go on ahead and go all the way around the triangle first and then knock out the straight lines. So you'll notice that my batting is actually extremely puffy. I don't know why, but sometimes this wool batting, some pieces of it tend to get fluffier than others. I have no idea why. But this piece in particular seems super fluffy, so I'm really doing a lot of work with my hands to keep it flat, kind of pulling out ever so slightly with my fingertips, pulling down with my thumbs this way, and that seems to help it flatten out a good bit. Okay, as I take out those pins, it's a lot easier to turn and manipulate the block in the machine. Here I've got to kind of roll it up. And then I'll stitch right back along that corner triangle. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is just use those stitches I've already stitched to travel stitch as I hit these lines. And it is a lot of rotation. I'm going to have to rotate, basically for every direction change. It's going to be a little time consuming, but there's only four of these in the whole block, so it won't take that much time. It won't be that annoying. As I turn things around, it's kind of nice to just kind of curl up the block like this, just kind of roll it up, and that makes it a little faster to just spin it around. Make sure, double check underneath you've got your batting here, just double check that it's not curling up on you. A lot of times when I roll my block like this, the backing fabric will tend to do some weird stuff, so watch out for that. Okay, and I'll roll it back around this way. And just 2 more lines to stitch. It's not actually that time consuming to, do all this rotation because the lines are very short. And that's the nice thing. So now that I'm back on track, all I have to do is just travel stitch back in the ditch and then continue on down. So from here, I'm basically going to do just the exact same thing. I'm going to continue stitching in the ditch down the perimeter of the block, down in that ditch between the center block and the border. I'll hit those triangle corners, fill in those lines, and keep working my way all the way around until all of those lines are stitched. So I've switched back to free motion quilting, I've moved my Supreme slider back on the feed dogs, and now I'm quilting within this square area with more zippeling. And I'm quilting this on a slightly wider scale, so there's roughly around 1/4 inch between the lines of quilting. So as I'm quilting this, I'm just kind of thinking about that, keeping in mind how wide apart I want those lines to be. And then also thinking about keeping the lines nice and straight and the angles sharp. So it's just two things to concentrate about. If you have trouble with this design, definitely mark it. It's included in the pattern, and you can mark it and quilt it much easier through your quilt. So definitely remember that that's open to you. So it's just a simple zigzaggy line, and you can see how I'm filling this working in a row so that I fill a little bit to the top, and then I work my way to the opposite side, just kind of zigzagging my way in and keeping it nice and random, but at the same time evenly filled. Now I always like to note that I move my Supreme slider around whenever I switch from free motion quilting to walking foot quilting. A walking foot puts a lot more pressure on the feed dogs and it could damage a Supreme slider, but I really like it when I'm free motion quilting because it really helps the block to move and slide smoothly and easily over the machine. I really can tell if I forget to move it whenever I start free motion quilting. It's like the block feels kind of stuck and I can't make these nice smooth movements with my hands. So now I'm kind of matching up with the zippeling from before, just some careful stitching here as I zigzag my way and escape from that area. So that's it for the zippeling in the block. And now we're going to start filling in these sections with fused fire. So this is a design that we learned several months ago, so I'll talk you through it. We're going to begin with a long curvy line, and we're going to travel stitch all the way back to the starting point. And careful stitching there. Now we're going to pivot and echo around it with a wiggly flame-like shape. Come to a point and wiggle back. Now you don't have to return all the way to the starting point, and like in this situation it's just really dense back there and there's a lot of seam allowances and stuff, so I'm not going to. I'm just going to kind of bounce against it and swing out and around with another echo, and I'm trying to get these echoes to the point where they're about 1/2 inch apart. That looks great. Okay, so that's the basic rules, the basic kind of steps of the design, and you want to memorize those steps because all you do to expand the design is wash and repeat the same set of steps. So here we're going to branch out with a wiggly shape, just a wiggly line, and you can make that as long or as short as you want. It's totally up to you. I'm going to return to the starting point. Now I'm going to swing out with a wiggly echo, nice flame-like shape. I'm going to come all the way back. I'm going to use those ditches. We've already stitched in the ditch and we've already secured. So I'm going to use those ditches to my advantage as I travel stitch around. You know, I could fill in there, I could stitch around that flame again, but it would be kind of off scale. The lines would be a lot closer together. I want to come all the way out like this and branch out with my next echo, just like that. I think that looks great. I'll swing around for one more echo. Just like that. Okay, now to move on to the design, I need to get over here and fill in this pocket. So I think I'll put one more echo into this space. Just kind of swing around, careful travel stitching. That looks good. And now I'll start another fused fire shape. So that's a wiggly line, travel stitch back, swing out and around for the echo. And the echo, come to a nice point, and then swing around. Now I've got this like weird pocket, so I think I'm just going to fill in that area with some simple curving lines. That keeps it consistent with the rest of the design. You could also just place your hand over a wiggly shape and just see what that looks like, and that might give you an idea of what it looks like when it's cut off, and that helps too. So fill in any weird gaps, just simple curving lines. A travel stitch back out and add a few more echoes to this side. There we go. And when it's filled on this nice big scale, it's really going to fill quickly. So you can see, I mean, basically just 3 fuse fire shapes, and I've knocked out that whole area. I'll put a few more lines right in this little gappy area, and that's done. So that is how we're going to fill in fuse fire into these spaces. And the best way to move around the block is to go on ahead and knock out a little bit of our border design, and that can help kind of connect these spaces together. So just travel stitch back, and I've drawn this as dot to dot, meaning I just marked the dots, the points of my flame border design. So I'm going to just stitch a wiggly line out to one dot and a wiggly line back, and that's going to form my flame border. So wiggle back and wiggle forward and to the edge. So back and forth. Very, very, very simple quilting. And in the corners we have just a small triangle, very simple to stitch. And you can quilt as much of this as you want. Like I could go back into the fuse fire here. It's really entirely up to you how you move around the block. I'll stitch just a little bit more of this border design so you can see it. I like this dot to dot quilting because it was minimal marking, but at the same time I know that that's going to fill into that space just exactly the right way. That's always nice to know, kind of know that the border's going to fit and not have, some kind of like random weird looking flame in the corner. That it's going to fit just exactly right all the way through the border. So I'm nearing this corner. I'll show you how to stitch the triangle. I do like going ahead and marking all the lines of the triangle in the corners just simply so that those lines are nice and straight. Sometimes it's hard to visualize that if they're not marked. Just going to pop around. And right here, my foot just got completely hung up because there's so much seam allowance in that corner. I'm going to rotate it around and just take a few careful stitches and then get back to my wiggly flames. It really is as simple as just a wiggly line going from point to point. Very, very easy. Okay, so from here, I'm just going to work my way around the block, filling in these open spaces with fuse fire, filling in the borders with that wiggly flame design. And here's what it looks like when we finish our glitter star block. So that's it for this video. I really hope that you enjoyed learning how to machine quilt this beautiful glitter star block with me. Don't forget you can find the quilt pattern right here at leahday.com. And please definitely ask any questions you have about this quilting process in the comments below. I'm here to help you learn how to master machine quilting. That's my goal. So definitely let me know if you have any questions, if you need any help or you have any questions. Of course, you can also subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any of the videos I'm coming out with every week. Until next time, let's go quilt.